Jack the Ripper, the killer who was never caught. He murdered at least 5 women in the space of 10 weeks, taunted police with letters in his own handwriting, and then simply stopped, vanishing so completely that London's entire police force, backed by the full resources of the British Empire, never identified him. Not then, not now. Over a century later, Jack the Ripper remains the most famous unsolved serial murder case in history, and the reason nobody has ever definitively cracked it might be more disturbing than any single suspect. In the autumn of 1888, the impoverished Whitechapel district of London's East End became the hunting ground for an unidentified killer who targeted women working the streets after dark, most of them struggling with poverty, severe enough to leave them with few other means of survival. The murders shared a signature so consistent and so brutal that police quickly recognized they were dealing with a single perpetrator, one who didn't simply kill his victims but mutilated their bodies afterward with a level of surgical precision that led investigators to seriously suspect the killer possessed genuine anatomical or medical knowledge. The first confirmed victim, Mary Ann Nichols, was found in late August with her throat cut and abdominal injuries that shocked even experienced police surgeons. Over the following weeks, additional victims followed: Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and finally Mary Jane Kelly, each attack escalating in its brutality, with Kelly's murder in November considered so severe that the scene reportedly left even hardened investigators visibly disturbed, since her body had been mutilated so extensively inside her own rented room that identifying her at all required significant forensic effort. What made the case a global sensation, beyond the horror of the murders themselves, was the killer's apparent desire for public attention. Police and newspapers received hundreds of letters claiming to be from the murderer, most almost certainly hoaxes written by opportunists or journalists seeking to sell newspapers off public fear. But a small handful contained details that investigators at the time considered disturbingly specific enough to potentially be genuine, including one letter signed Jack the Ripper, a name that stuck permanently in public memory, and another package sent directly to a local vigilance committee containing half of a human kidney, accompanied by a note claiming the rest had been fried and eaten. A detailed forensic examination could neither definitively confirm nor rule out as belonging to one of the victims. London's Metropolitan Police pursued an enormous number of suspects, ultimately investigating and dismissing well over 100 individuals, ranging from local butchers and slaughterhouse workers with the anatomical knowledge to explain the precise mutilations, to foreign immigrants targeted largely by the era's own xenophobic assumptions rather than genuine evidence, to members of the era's medical and even aristocratic classes, whose access to surgical training made them plausible candidates in the eyes of investigators desperate for any workable lead. The investigation employed remarkably modern techniques for the era, including some of the earliest documented uses of forensic photography to document crime scenes and injuries, and even an early, crude attempt at criminal profiling, with police surgeon Thomas Bond producing what many historians consider one of history's first psychological profiles of an unknown offender, describing the killer as likely a quiet, physically unremarkable man capable of blending into his surroundings without drawing suspicion, a profile disturbingly consistent with how many modern serial killers have since been documented to actually present themselves. And then, after Mary Jane Kelly's murder in November of 1888, the killings simply stopped. No further victims matching the established pattern were ever confirmed, no arrest was ever made, and no suspect was ever conclusively tied to the murders through evidence that has satisfied historians and forensic experts in the more than a century since. The case was formally left unsolved, and Scotland Yard's original investigative files, though publicly accessible today, offer no definitive resolution, only a long list of dismissed suspects and unanswered questions. Modern researchers, employing techniques unavailable to Victorian investigators, have continued attempting to close the case, including controversial DNA analysis conducted in recent years on a shawl allegedly recovered from one of the crime scenes, with one privately funded study claiming to match genetic material to a specific historical suspect, a Polish immigrant named Kosminski, who had been named as a suspect by police at the time and was later confined to a mental asylum. However, this DNA analysis has faced significant criticism from the broader scientific community, given serious, unresolved questions about the shawl's actual chain of custody, whether it can genuinely be linked to the crime scene at all, and methodological concerns regarding contamination risks inherent in analyzing genetic material well over a century old, meaning the case remains formally unsolved despite this claimed breakthrough. What makes Jack the Ripper endure as history's most famous unsolved murder case isn't simply the horror of the crimes themselves, but the unsettling combination of factors that made the killer so difficult to catch in the first place. A chaotic, overcrowded urban environment offering effortless anonymity, a police force operating without any of the forensic tools modern investigators rely on today, and a killer who, by every indication available, understood exactly how to exploit both, vanishing back into the very crowd that had spent 10 terrified weeks searching for him. More than 135 years later, the identity of Jack the Ripper remains genuinely unknown, a mystery that has outlived every suspect ever named, every theory ever proposed, and every investigator who ever worked the case. A killer who got away with it so completely that the only name history ever gave him wasn't his own. It was simply the one he gave himself. If stories like this, where history's most notorious killers vanish completely and left only questions behind, are exactly what you come here for, subscribe to The Grave Details, because history holds more stories like this than most people will ever know.